Haere, no mai haere mai ki tēnei hui. Welcome to this question and answer session ahead of our meeting on Tuesday. Obviously we were going to meet today, but it's good to have those extra couple of days. I just want to remind you all that this session is public and live streamed. And I will pass over to Baz for a few quick words of introduction and then we're going to get into it.
Afternoon, everyone. So this is, in essence, the second briefing or Q&A that we're doing on this meeting. So as you recall, we had one last week on the 13th. We presented some information and shared that with you at that point in time. We also responded through Q&As at that point in time, so you've already had one batch of Q&As that have gone out. This afternoon, we've also sent another load of Q&As, or answers to Q&As. There's still a few outstanding, so we do recognise that, and we're on to those, and we'll get those out as soon as we can, and that's likely to be tomorrow. But in essence, that's all I really want to do in terms of introductions. And hand back to you, Chair, in terms of Q&As.
So we do have 2 hours set aside for this session, and I think some of it will be very free-flowing. That's hard to say. But if there are, I'm wondering if there are any questions about the paper, which is essentially the rationale. We could take those first and then move on to the appendices. Does anybody have any questions about the actual paper or the rationale? So I guess I'm talking about the, the kind of the point, and then we go through and it's the tables of proposed savings. So no, maybe we just go to all questions, and so if you have a question, please raise your hand. We'll start with you, Councillor Pennant.
I'll ask 3 and then can I go back on the list?
3.
Only 3, right, well. Sorry, I did ask about the Johnsonville green space and I'm going to ask it again. So if we don't do this, does that mean we're not going to get much green space in Johnsonville for the next decade? Can we just be really clear on that?
In essence, I'll ask James to expand on that, but in essence, this proposal relates to the sale of the library and using those funds for a green space in that area. And so in essence, there is a current agreement through committee to do that. The recommendation is not to do that. In terms of other plans in Johnsonville, I don't specifically know those, so I'll ask James to potentially answer that.
100% correct, Baz. There is some funding in the LTP for further expansion of the outer greenbelt, to purchasing land for the outer greenbelt, but it may not necessarily be in Johnsonville.
Okay, so you're basically saying this is our only chance really to create some space in the town centre?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Can I also just ask about the Otari landscape one, which I thought was a plan of some sort, but it was actually the nursery. So how critical is that? Just trying to be pretty hard on the dollars.
I think what we answered for that one was that there is a necessary piece of work to do at some point over the next 10 years in terms of refurbishing and upgrading those buildings so that they remain fit for use. And there is also an opportunity to expand the visitor attraction around the nursery and the lab as well.
Okay.
So in essence, that's what the funding was for.
Okay, and my last question for now, the whale. Who's the best person to answer?
Liam is the best person to answer those questions.
Right.
But
So,
we do have Phil here,
Oh,
so
okay.
he'll be able to answer.
lovely, thank you. Hi, Phil. So my concern is that we don't stop this project, we don't send it back to, to the Never Never Land. My understanding is the trust needs $5 million to keep things alive and keep getting that resource consent. Is that your understanding?
So the trust has made an offer to us, and we've read that as being a capped contribution by council into the particular area that they want to develop, and that represents the costs that we would incur in resolving the earthquake-prone building anyway.
And just to clarify, my understanding is that's 5 million plus 3 million.
Yeah, so the 3 million is for the resource consent, and then but that is and then they will provide the rest of the funding.
Of the Whale area, yes.
For the Whale area. Okay, so basically all we have to do is this, well, we've got to do the 3 anyway. It's the 5 is really the city's contribution.
Under that offer model, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Thanks. This is probably a kind of a question based on a really low level of understanding, but the the Begonia House is an issue which I really don't understand. And I mean, are our options only to either basically demolish this thing or to spend a large amount of money, or is there some kind of keep it on life support and type option? Because it seems a shame to, kill it. I mean, I personally don't like it, but I'd just like to know what's our sort of least cost option in terms of keeping it existing?
Councillor, I think that's best answered by James. We have done a detailed business case which has numerous options, but I'll let James walk through that with you.
So it is in a state that it requires significant money invested in it to bring it back to, in essence, full service. The Begonia House is the greenhouse at the front, and then there's actually staff facilities at the back as well, which back onto a bank behind it. So the advice that we've had is that we need to, in essence, remove the staff areas, as in demolish them, do some work on the bank, depending on what we're going to build there, do some work on the bank, and then fix the actual Begonia House itself, which is basically a glass house. So you need to take the glass out, and a lot of the framing also needs work as well as all the services, the plant, the HVAC, etc. in there. So in essence, you've almost got to take the whole thing apart to actually fix it. So the problem that we had with the budget that's in the current LTP is it's not really enough to actually fix it properly. So we would, and I think it was actually mentioned in the LTP that was published, that in actual fact it is more like a $20 to $25 million amount of investment required to actually bring that fully back to a good service state, in essence, including the staff facilities at the back of it.
Yeah, if you could use your mic, Councillor.
Sorry, the question was, what's the least possible amount of money? Is there a lower cost proposition? You're talking about the complete refurbishment for a lot of dough. I wanted to know whether there was anything we could spend a little amount of money on, but still keep it kind of functional. Yeah, or at least still keep it in existence.
So when the business case was done earlier this year, there were a number of options put in the business case, including lower cost options. The problem is that they will leave certain problems in place and undealt with if we were to pursue those options, which ultimately will mean that we've got to go back and do further work on the building. Second thing is, during the winter, there were some further storms that caused further damage to the building as well. So we actually need to update the options in that business case before coming back with a final answer.
In the context of what we're doing, the LTP, are you effectively saying that if we don't want to spend a lot of money, that we do have to get rid of it?
What I'm saying is that if you spend less money, which we would have to actually go through and figure out if there is an achievable outcome at a lower spend, we would need to go and do that work, right? The risk is that if we don't put enough investment into it, it won't be able to be used as a building. So then if you decided not to do any investment and also not demolish it, it might end up just having to be closed and sit there.
So if we do the demolition proposition, does that leave the coffee shop still in existence?
Yes, that was the proposal. If it was demolished, that we would demolish but leave the coffee shop there. The practicality of doing that from a construction perspective may mean that you actually have to demolish the entire thing and build that piece back, but we would need to get further design work done to figure out if that's achievable.
Thanks.
Councillor McNulty.
Thank you. 2 questions. So with our financial strategy, what we're saying is we have 500 million in debt headroom above 225 immediately for unexpected events. So Town Hall 2, COVID 2, Plague of Locusts. We are then saying that the 500 million that we want to establish for the 1.8 billion under insurance risk, that doesn't include surge pricing, is something that we will grow to by year 5. Is that the right balance given the quantum and the likelihood of the risks? Would it not be right to have that 500 million above the headroom immediately there for the underinsurance risk and be growing that 500 million for the unexpected events? It seems, with the information we've given, that those two pools are actually out of whack.
Can you just repeat the last part of your point, Councillor, just around the when the 500 million becomes available?
So under your proposals, at year 5, so what I'm saying is we are basically growing an underinsurance pool of 500 million over 5 years, and we've got a 500 million pool of unexpected events, yet it seems like the underinsurance risk is far more pressing or prevalent than the Town Hall 2 or COVID 2 type risk.
So, yes, absolutely. What we're saying, and look, year 5 is year 5 to 6 was the year that we were recommending. What we're trying to do is strike a balance in our advice to you around when it would be financially prudent to achieve that. Because if you were to rip out the 500 immediately in year 1, which I think is your point, what you would end up doing is you would actually create consequences to some of the work that is underway on some core projects, as well as things that need to be invested in, which could be seen as being imprudent. So, things like if you were to stop work on the Town Hall, for example, you would be paying almost the same amount, but not finishing, for all the exit clauses in the contract, but not having a completed Town Hall. So we're thinking about the financial prudence element of that in the financial advice. If you recall, financial prudence just doesn't come down to the numbers, it also comes to making sure that you're still adequately investing in your assets and your current assets. So this is about trying to find a balance as to how we build in the ability for us to, in effect, have a capacity to respond to an event. It does mean that at the beginning of this, we're facing bigger risks because we are overexposed. And what we're trying to do is move towards less risk exposure, albeit we'll always have a level of risk exposure.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to understand, but your view or the view of the council is that the 500 million unexpected events risk, so that's Town Hall COVID locusts, is more prevalent in day 1 of the LTP than the 500 million we want to establish for the underinsurance risk of 1.8 billion, and that's why we're...
So the first 500 million, so anything borrowing above the 225 limit comes at a cost to our current ratepayers. Yep. So if we are to borrow additional money and go above that 225 limit, we need to service that debt somehow. And the only way to service that debt for us as a council is through rates. And so that's why we've preserved the 225 debt to revenue limit, is to ensure that we are not passing on any further costs in terms of rates, because we've got an affordability challenge that we also need to think about in that equation. And we know through the modelling that we've done that at least one kind of suburb within Wellington is already at 5% of household income in terms of rates. And we know that's growing by year 3 of the long-term plan to at least 3 or 4 suburbs. So we know that some of our suburbs and some parts of our city are already stretched in terms of household affordability of rates, and we need to take that into consideration.
Yeah, sorry, I think we're having sort of parallel convo.
Talking at crossroads, sorry.
Yeah, maybe there's an amendment that I've sent through, so maybe when you review that for advice, what it would seek to basically do is commingle those, so bring down the debt to revenue ratio and commingle any headroom into one pool rather than having those things separate. Absolutely,
and you could absolutely bring down the debt to revenue ratio. I think we talked about that last time. The way that we've articulated it and having 2 separate kind of headroom components could be confusing. We've just kept it that way for consistency purposes because that's how it's been discussed in the past. Yeah. But however you want to articulate it is totally fine, and it's just about taking our community on that journey.
Cool. Yep. I do have one more, but I can come back since that went further.
Yeah. Deputy Mayor Foon.
Kia ora, just questions about the Frank Kitts Park again, if that's all right. With the $5 million, with the offer from the Whālei Malai Trust, I just want to get a realistic understanding of the challenge that this poses to the project in totality. So I want to understand what the bare minimum option could be to deliver, to deliver this with the Whālei's contribution.
Yeah, okay, so through you, Madam Chair, is that right? Yes, I can see you.
I am here.
So the current proposal was capped 5 million, with 3 million in the first 3 years. And we believe and this is backed with some reasonable quantity surveying evidence on the balance of the park, that there's a $15 million figure thereabouts, subject to detailed design and costings and resource consent, that would finish and complete the park.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, so you're saying an additional 15 million would complete the whole park?
Yeah, to provide the advice I think we're giving is that it's basically the request of the Whālei that they've asked for a 5 million contribution to the demolition works that would then allow them to go and build the Whālei at their risk and all the other costs associated with that. The 15 is an estimate. The staff have gone back to try to understand that offer to complete the rest of the park. And where you place that within the first 10 years or out years is up to council, but we think that is the current design thinking that we've done and the quantity surveying we've done on that design, it is about that $15 million ballpark figure.
Okay, so if we just want to complete can the project, with what the Whālei are contributing, and we put in another 5, so we match their offer, what will be completed and what won't be with that?
I'll have a go, but I might look to Phil. Just to be clear, all I believe they've asked council to do is to commit 5 million to their part of the works. So we have to remember there's the Chinese garden redevelopment and the balance of the park, make good if you like, once construction happens. I don't know, unless you do, Phil, about that actual quantum the Whālei are looking to spend on the total redevelopment of the Whālei Malai.
No, and that's why I was careful with my answer to you earlier, where I lingered on the capped $5 million, because they've made an offer to us, and the way I read that offer is there's a premise of 50-50 share. So I need to, most of my advice to you is to go with a $5 million capped approach that limits our exposure in that particular part of the park. The reality or the practicality of being able to build the Whālei as designed in isolation of the rest of the park is questionable. It in effect creates an island that you can't get to for all intents and purposes. There will be other works that will need to be addressed around the outside.
Yeah. Chair, one more. Just around just understanding the ground beneath the Frank Kitts Park and the earthquake proneness of the building, what will council need to do in the future to deal with that? Can you explain the stability of the ground and the building, and what is the likelihood that council will need to do in the future?
I'll refer back to the 2021 paper where council agreed to demolish the building, just so that I limit the expectations of you about my engineering expertise. So we put to councillors at the time a proposition that it was not economic nor efficient to strengthen that building, and that was largely based on the earthquake-prone building status, the DSAs that have been done on that building, and the ground conditions, probably more importantly, that the advice that we'd received was that it's at great risk, if you like, of lateral spread in a moderate to significant earthquake.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Free.
I was going to ask some questions about the organics collection. What are the implications of us having fewer partners to partner with in terms of building the organics processing plant, service, whatever? Facility.
Through you, Chair, I'm sorry, I don't have Chris here today. He's unwell, so I might have
Okay.
to come back to you on
Okay.
that. I apologise, that's my lack of knowledge just yet.
That's okay.
But I will come back to you.
No, all my questions were about organics, so I'll
Okay.
keep them.
All right. Sorry about that. Councillor Chung.
I have a question about the Begonia House, and this will go to James. James, as we discussed earlier, I'm trying to understand if we want to consider a private option to actually do the Begonia House at no cost to the council, then does that actually stay in the long-term plan, or do we actually take that out because we're not going to consider the 25 million because it's not going to be funded by us? So where do we actually leave it?
I probably would have to consult with Andrea on that one, to be honest. If there was the opportunity to have to purchase the Begonia House or fix the Begonia House, would we still leave any funding in the LTP?
Sorry. So I think the first consideration that we would need to make is whether or not that's a reasonable assumption that we would that we have. So we'd need some evidence that we could reasonably obtain that kind of level of funding before making that kind of assertion in the underlying information. That would be my recommendation. Yeah.
Councillor Wineta.
Kia ora, team. Hey, can we just confirm that the city streets priorities that were agreed by council through amendment during the last LTP process are not being recommended for actual cutting, just rephasing? Have I got that right?
Yes, that's correct.
So I understand the Cuba Street work is being excuse me, is being proposed to be moved to year 6. Where was it originally? Was it like year 2, 3?
I'll get Vida to answer that.
So originally we had it sitting in year 2 for the trial pedestrianisation. There was no funding for the final permanent transformation project yet. That was going to be based on the trial, and then a new LTP would need to decide if that was happening. I did nod to Liam and said yes to your previous question. I just want to be really clear that we are proposing to cut funding for Harbour Quays and Eastern Connections, which were also some of the city street, but the central city ones we're not.
Okay, sweet. And last one, what are the issues with the car park? I'm finding that quite hard to understand.
I think he's relating to the Cuba Street car park. Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the Cuba Street car park today has access off Cuba Street. So if we pedestrianise it, that car park will no longer be able to operate.
So it relates to the acquisition of the car park for the purpose of that Cuba Street redevelopment. Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks, Tim.
Back to you, Councillor Pannett, unless there's anybody who hasn't asked questions that wants to go on the list. Okay, we'll go to you, Councillor Abdirahman.
I did ask this question a couple of days ago, Andrea. As part of this long-term plan amendment, how much has been cut from the transport project not related to New Zealand TA's funding cut?
Councillor, so there are just a few projects that aren't, or in the LTP were not fully subsidised by NZTA. As we explained when we discussed the NLTP funding implications, the objective of the cuts that we made was to neutralise the budget. And by neutralisation, what we meant was that we would leave the debt to revenue ratio intact. And so the recommended approach that we've provided to you has been based off that. So we've kind of looked at the funding implications and what that would mean from a revenue perspective, and where council has already made decisions on fully funding certain projects. We've in essence looked at de-scoping some of those projects, and so some of those projects are de-scoped in the recommended option that you're looking at, but not every single option has been fully cut.
on top, just a few things for the program that I'm responsible for. On top of the NLTP neutralisation, we are also in this amendment proposing in the first 10 years cutting an additional 23.3 million from the Cycle Network program funding and an additional approximately 65 million from the money that was returned from City Streets, and that's on top of that neutralisation.
So my question would go like this, Andrea, to follow up on this. Example, it's my understanding the Brooklyn connection is going ahead compared to skate park in Kilbirnie. How do you prioritize those things? Is that because we already made a decision on one or not another? How are you working on that around that prioritization?
So we haven't prioritised. The way that we have put all these projects to you is through using the principles that we've applied. It is therefore up to you as elected members to make the decisions on where you want to prioritise the cuts to be made. So this is just a list of proposals for you as elected members to make decisions on.
So
I'm sorry, I'll put you back on the list.
Yeah, go
on. Councillor Pannett.
Thank you. Andrea, is it possible, because I don't want to make more work for the staff, to get some of the business cases behind some of these? So I'm particularly interested in Begonia House, the housing upgrades, and all the city streets ones.
So some of those business cases will be coming to you in due course. So, the housing upgrades, for example, is not yet finalised and we're still working on that. And so that will come to you in due course. The Begonia House would need to look at that. And, so you could make those requests. It would need to update it as well for all.
Who do I make the request to?
Well, you could send it to the relevant chief or me. I'll work through that.
Okay, I can put that in writing. Okay, so I'm just finding it a bit hard to understand what has been reduced in a project.
Absolutely, and the key thing that I'll emphasise here is this is I always try to explain an LTP like a statement of proposal. Remember that when business cases are developed more fully and we've got that direction from you, they, for those significant projects, we'll be bringing them back to you to align that with the program that you've put in place and the priorities that you've set for us. So in effect, this LTP is about setting where your priorities are. We then go away and do the business cases to work towards those priorities, and then we come back to you to say, this is what your options are under these business cases. Do you want us to proceed? How do you want us to proceed? So this is a statement of intent as opposed to, having direct business cases nailed down for every single project throughout the next 10 years.
So my second question then is, the problem is I'm finding it difficult, say for example in the Eastern Corridor, by reducing the money, what are we losing? And I need to know that sort of before Tuesday, but not in great detail.
Yeah, and so that we can answer those types of questions here, but without the business case in full detail. But
okay,
I think the answer is that we are going. We have to acknowledge we are doing this out of the, we went through all of this process with an LTP, but now to do an LTP amendment, it does mean, that we are dealing with a less than ideal information, not through any intent to do so, but we are working on a foreshortened kind of process. So that's just the reality we find ourselves in.
Okay.
Liam,
Thank you, Andrea and Madam Chair. So the information relating to Eastern Connections is just going to fund the articulated buses that Greater Wellington are going to run along the route, the number 2 route. What the reduction in project budget relates to is the amenity upgrades along the way.
Oh, okay.
So this is the town centre beautification work and various other additions on top of the actual bus.
That actually might be enough, so that's good. And sorry, last question, Vida, the suburban centres, you were going to give us some more information?
Actually need to face the mic. I'm sorry, I know it feels weird to not face the person, but sorry, people might be watching this.
The suburban centres, Vida, you just said you were able to give us some more information, just about which ones?
Yes, and is that in the, it was in the Q&A, I don't know if it's the ones that came out today at lunchtime or if it's coming out afterwards. But yes, we have done that. So it's in
Yeah,
the
it's in the ones that have come out.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, there's a lot coming through. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Randall.
Thank you. Just with respect to the Begonia House, has there been any option to build a brand new Begonia House? And we're just thinking about the options we looked for when we looked at the library and upgrading it. So I know that the intention was to restore the building to be earthquake, but has any option to just say just have a brand new modern architectural straightforward greenhouse as a new building replacement? And what was the cost of that?
So no, we haven't looked at that option of a brand new building. There is a heritage overlay on Botanic Gardens, so there'd be a consent required to, if we were to do something radical like demolish or replace it with a new building. It's just that the state, the condition and the type of building being a greenhouse with a lot of glass, etc. in it, the approach that you would need to take to actually, bring it back to full service, it's possible that it might actually be better to, in essence, pull the whole thing down and start again, but we haven't got to that point in the design yet.
Okay. I also want to ask about the carbon credits, which I still find confusing. The officers propose not funding carbon credits for a few years. Is that because we've got some extra carbon credits in the bank?
Yes.
So, okay. Right. Do people who are paying, the carbon credits are funded from tip charges. We're still going, for the period with which we're not buying carbon credits, are we going to still be charging people who use landfill for the carbon credits that we're not buying?
Yes, so the carbon credits we purchased are purchased as an asset and sit on our balance sheet. When they're surrendered through the use our emissions through the landfill, that cost is an expense, and we recoup that cost through the landfill charges.
So we're sort of.
Councillor, can I put you back on the list? That's 3.
I just wanted to understand what's happening with
Well,
this.
I'll put you back on the list.
Oh, well, okay. We'll continue the conversation then.
Being very consistent, everybody's getting 3 questions. I'm sorry. Okay, I heard a question, I heard an answer. Councillor McNulty.
Yes, with our commercial differential, the 3.7 to 1, obviously the rationale is around recouping the usage of our CBD predominantly from people that come in outside of Wellington. When we combine that with the proposals around the cutting suburban upgrades, things like the Johnsonville Library, I guess what's the rationale of 3.7 to 1 in suburbs like Miramar or Tawa, where that usage or demand on infrastructure from outside the city is not the same?
We have not provided or had a chance to look at any of that advice. That would require us to undertake a full rating review. And we have had to take that off our program of work because we're doing an LTP amendment. We just simply don't have the capacity to be able to do that. So, in that circumstance, if people felt that that there was a less obvious alignment to the 3.7, then they would need to challenge that through a formal process, i.e. a legal process, and it could expose us to risks in that regard, but we have not had the opportunity to look at that.
Okay. With Frank Hitz Park, just for some clarification, is the car park rating likely to change through the earthquake-prone building review led by Chris Pink, just to get this on the record, because I've heard differing stories?
Yeah, well, look, for you, Madam Chair, that James is just saying it's currently 15%. And look, it's speculating what the review might spit out, Councillor. I'm not actually sure. You probably won't hear, because I'm on the steering group, until early. Yeah, I think probably March or April next year. You may get an indication of recommendations from the from the steering group.
Maybe better question is, would it be in scope of what the review's looking at? Not necessarily will its rating change, but would the type of structure that it is potentially be impacted in scope by what the government are looking
Well,
at?
the seismic review looks at how we place the standards on the buildings that are prone. So everything's in scope from a structural point of view.
Okay, I'll go back on the list, please.
Councillor Abdirahman.
Last week when you told us about what it means prudence, it's not only the financial side of it, and you mentioned how community expectation and some of the things that we need to include. So I just wonder, here example where it says safer route to school, footpaths upgrades, $500,000, $600,000, but there are some big chunk of monies in city streets, the organic waste, the Golden Mile. How are we managing when we talk about those prudence, where we're leaving all the community projects that community is really passionate about, including the 500,000 and 5 million or 2 millions, when we're not even touching much on those big ones? I mean, we're touching, but basically.
Yeah, well, again, we have developed this on the basis of the principles that we've set. That's the list. Again, it's up to you as elected members to decide and to make the balance of decisions on the projects that you've got as to which ones you want to proceed with or not. These are just the areas that we've identified using those principles. It's not up to us as staff to pick and choose based on anything. That is a job for elected members to do. That's your role. We haven't put any overlay around that.
Follow up? Cool. So basically, if you ask me now, thinking back again, the principles that we voted on, I would be changing my mind on some of those things, because the reason I'm really saying that is when you put those things in front of me, I looked at it.
Could you come to a question, Councillor?
Yeah, so do you think maybe now that principle should have come after we got all those figures and looking at it, instead of putting the principles in now? We are caught into fitting into that principle.
I want to give a political answer, which is that the principles we will apply when we make the decisions on Tuesday.
Yeah, so the principles that we've developed is for us to use them to prepare guidance for you to consider the list.
Do you have another question?
So based on that example, you advising us to do Golden Mile, only the Corny Place site. And in the principle, it says if the funding is already allocated, the idea is to finish it off. Even though we know only doing that part is going to risk the funding, but you are advising against, to some extent, against that principle. Is that right?
If you chose to take another project or take other projects that you want to cut, you are more, you can put those up for debate. That's entirely your prerogative. We have just used those principles. We've highlighted those. As I said earlier, I think we've done that on the base of risk. So for those that we have already got in train or in contract, it would cost us to break contracts, and often in many cases at the same level as the amount that we're spending. And so that's why we've taken the approach to the advice that we have. But equally, anything that you want to cut, that is, again, your decision. We've just provided you with some advice here. If there's alternatives that you want to consider, you're free to put those up as amendments on the day, like prior to. And if you need help with those, we're happy to help.
Councillor Free.
So just one question that might be able to be answered about the organics. I seem to be reading that the government hasn't yet made the decision that there will have to be compulsory organics treatments. Is that the case? What sort of coercion are we under to actually do this work because of central government policy, or has that disappeared?
I think we're best to come back and answer all the organic questions once Chris is back. But maybe we'll meet with you offline and get those questions, and then we can respond to them by email.
Okay, thank you. And can I ask one more? The city streets funding, so what I've heard is, or read, is that we're not funding the Eastern Bus Priority apart from bendy buses, necessary adjustments for bendy buses, and we're not funding the second transport spine, but we are still funding Cuba Street. I guess my question is, how much thinking's been done about our actual overall cycling network and what implications this would have for our cycling network?
Okay, I'll get Vida to respond to that.
And do we have a plan?
So just in terms, we are still continuing with the second spine, just a reduced version. So in the amendment, what we're proposing is a $10 million project instead of the $52 million project that was in the LTP as an interim solution. So it's still there and correct around the Eastern bus connections. In terms of the Central City bike network, that is still there. What we're proposing with this is continuing with the cross-city bike connection, which was prioritised through the LTP, and that creates an east-west and a north-south connection through Te Aro, which at the moment is a gap in the network.
So does the work on Cuba Street help address that bike network, or is it completely, no, okay.
Councillor Randall?
Yes, just to continue with the these carbon credits assets. So as the landfill generates CO2, we expense the carbon credits that we have. Methane. Okay, yeah, so yes, as methane is generated, and probably other smells, as people know, is generated by the landfill. We actually expense the assets that carbon credit assets as we have.
Correct. Yep.
And what happens to them as an asset when we expense them?
Decreases, so it would move to an expense off the balance sheet. So each year we estimate how many credits we will need, and we purchase those in advance, and then we hold them there until we need to use them, and that's based on the emissions, and that's when it gets expensed. So we budget for that expense side and asset side, and that is taken into consideration when we look at the revenue that we need to get from the landfill fees.
Right. And so we've got enough to last us 6 years in the bank, or we've purchased enough for 6 years roughly.
Yes,
so that's,
based on our estimations.
Okay, but the charges actually are as the methane, as a result of the methane from the tip. Okay.
Correct. So the expense won't change.
I think I finally got it. Thank you for bearing with me. With respect to city streets, in terms of the cycleway program, what's the number of car parks that are planned to be lost from the program, and how much revenue is going to be lost as that program proceeds?
It's in the Q&A, Councillor, but you wouldn't have time to probably look at it yet.
No,
can I just
know.
take that on notice, and we can repeat those numbers to you later if you like. But they're actually in there.
Are they?
You've got
For
both
city
the
streets?
cost, yep.
As opposed to the cycleways?
Based on your question to us that went through Q&A, yes, we've got our cost estimates of lost revenue based on car parking and the lost car parking as a rate of city streets. There's one nuance to the advice we've given you, in that the cross-city cycle connection east-west is connected to the Harbour Quays matter, but that's all set out in the Q&A for you, and you can come back and ask a question on it later.
I've just looked, it's not actually the one which you received today, so it will be the one that's coming in the next tomorrow.
Oh, so it's the one I haven't got yet. Okay.
Councillor, that's 3 again, so I'll put you back on the list. I'm counting.
It's not 3.
It is 3. You can watch the video back, but I've got you back on the list. Councillor O'Neill.
Kia ora, I just wanted to follow up on question that was asked last week, as I understand some who have been held before back then and now. I wanted to ask about the assertion of Huitipara Park in Lyle Bay, that it will be funded by another partner. Did we have any developed understanding on this? Has there been any progress?
Yeah, I'll have a go through you, Madam Chair. Phil is also going to be able to help, but the proposal is at the eastern end of Lyell Bay towards the Spruce Goose establishment, just on the airport land side. And it is a similar proposal to what was put in Huatapara Park, not like, but similar. And is there anything else, Phil, you'd like to add? It's a proposition by Wellington International Airport Limited.
Oh no, sorry, to clarify, I wasn't asking about the airport's proposal. I was asking about the original community proposal that is currently in our long, but recommended for cut.
I may have to defer to Paul Andrews as well. He's here, but we're dealing with a group at the moment, so we are speaking with the Huatapara community group that initiated the project. We've actually got a session with them again tomorrow. So they broadly are in support of the proposition that the airport has provided, but there are a number of matters to be worked through, and one of those matters, of course, is the question around what they do with the funding that's been allocated for them, which obviously sits partly in the LTP as well.
So just to clarify, the decision that we will be making on Huitapara Park, it is proposed that we will cut 2.4 million. And if that is a choice for councillors, I wanted to ask if we have had any commitment from other partners that they will take on that 2.4 million. Like, have we received anything formal? Or
not in that context, because if the airport go ahead, and develop the facilities that they are saying they're going to deliver, then that naturally brings into question why would you hold that money in the LTP for what is effectively a duplication, notwithstanding there are other facilities attached to it.
Councillor Pannett.
Thank you. James, given the legislation doesn't cover the City to Sea Bridge, the prone legislation, are you saying that it reaches the threshold under the Building Act as a dangerous structure?
I'm not sure of the exact language and whether the word dangerous is used, but certainly it meets the criteria of an earthquake-prone building under the Building Act, correct?
Okay, but sorry to be pedantic, it can't legally because it's not a building. It's only the earthquake-prone building legislation from 2016 only refers to buildings.
That's correct.
So is it dangerous under the Act? Have you got any statutory test on it?
Councillor, I just want to double check because this is not part of the LTP amendment.
No, it's the City to Sea Bridge.
Yeah,
but I'm still putting it up for amendment.
Well, anyway, we'll come back to that, but it's not part of the LTP amendment, is my understanding.
Well, but it's still on the LTP.
Oh, you're okay. You want to put a separate amendment.
So maybe
I do think we might have a process question because we're going into hearings tomorrow.
Okay, so that would be helpful, but it would also just be helpful to clarify, just to be really clear about what legislation applies.
Yeah, Councillor, we can maybe take that offline and help you work through the process with the hearings tomorrow and working through that.
That would be super. Thank you very much. If I could go back on the list again. Thank you. Oh, well, I think
you've got one more.
I
can still count to three.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I thought I'd asked three. Liam and Vida, the Green Network Plan, if we push this out, what is the climate impact of not having so many trees?
We haven't done any carbon calculations, but and I don't think we can, but it would mean that we wouldn't meet our Green Network Plan targets.
Right, by in 10 years' time?
So the targets were double number of trees in 10 years.
Right, thanks.
Councillor McNulty.
With Begonia House, James, do we know if the complexity of the repairs, how the heritage status of a building is playing into those? Does it have an impact, or is it just almost irregardless?
So the work that would be required to the building would need to be consented, and the heritage implications would be considered during that. So they would look at the design or whatever work that we wanted to do to the building and determine, whether that was acceptable or not in regards to the heritage status as part of that consenting process.
Yeah.
Our intent is to, in essence, bring it back to as it was originally, right? Without changing any fundamental aspects of the design. That hopefully that means that the approach that we would take wouldn't have a problem from a heritage perspective during consenting.
So, given there's some changes likely to come from central government around heritage imminently, if that building was taken out of heritage status, would that allow an option to do it cheaper, more cheerful? Is there cost savings that could potentially be realised?
So, in order to give you a really good answer, I'm going to refer to Sean Ordain.
Thank you. And actually, I'll keep you up there, Sean, because the next one's for you. So,
Good. All right. So the Begonia House is a contributing building within a heritage area. It is also on the New Zealand Historic Places Trust list as a Category 1 heritage area. What the effect of that is, it's not a listed building, but it's a contributing building that does place a need to effectively keep it in character. So you could do things like replace the plant within it, etc. Sorry, the plant as in the heating thing, not the green stuff. In a way that you perhaps couldn't do with a listed heritage building. So, but it would drive you cost. The difficulty with determining a legislative amendment is if the minister was to bring forward proposals to delist individual heritage buildings, that would not work because it is a contributing building in a heritage area. He would need to amend the law around heritage areas. The difficulty with all of this stuff is you must form, as Andrea said, a statement of intent with your, or statement of proposal with your LTP. And given the uncertainty that now stands on what is within the legislation, I'm not sure that it would be strong enough for you to make that assumption and put it into the LTP.
Thank you, Sean. While you're there, I think you might be the one that actually has these figures. In terms of just trying to understand the proposals across the spectrum of the city, with the census figures, my back of the hand was in terms of population growth. Takapū Northern Ward was about 2,000 people. Pukahino, Lambton, about 600, and all other wards basically stayed stagnant. Do you have verification around those numbers?
So you're referring to the number of people within those wards, so the growth in the number of people within those wards between the two censuses.
Yeah.
Broadly, those numbers are correct.
Yeah.
The thing I would point council to, though, is the number of households. So the number of households has continued to grow in Wellington, but the size of households has continued to fall, and so that is what's leading to that change. So areas like the Northern Ward and Pukahino that have seen increases in the numbers of households higher than the rest of the city have seen population growth as a result.
Cool, thank you. I think that's 3.
Yes, it is.
Back on the list, please.
Okay. I'm now writing it down. Councillor Abdurrahman.
Probably this is for Vida, maybe. We have details of most of the projects from other areas. Example, I know when the toilet in Newtown will be, in year 2 and how much it costs. For most of the projects where it says Cycleway, Golden Mile, City Street, and Central City upgrades, there are so many projects that goes into those things from the cycle lane. We don't know which one is where and how much it costs, and there's no pricing for them, and there's no way you can look at it through. Do you have that figures? And if you do, how can we get it?
So if I use the bike network as an example, so we had a program budget allocation through the 21 LTP, and that was then based, and then the bike network plan was developed, which said exactly which streets and where those routes were, primary and secondary routes. And so that forms the basis of how we spend that money to deliver. The program budget covers all of those. We then go through and we set them into tranches based on the area approach. And once we've got a business case, then we have a project budget. But before we have a business case where we actually get an estimation of what that project's going to cost, more accurately made, we have it at a program level. We've got some very high rough order costs for each section before we have a business case and a traffic resolution, but they're used they're kept at a program budget level. But we can probably send those through, but we've got them, but just reminding that the finish what you started, they are business case and they are accurate project budgets. Anything that hasn't got a business case yet is a rough order cost, and it's just taken from a linear metre estimate.
So maybe for Andrea now, do we have the figure then? In total, how much would be? Because we got different categories, and all of them you got different part of it that's going into that project. Do we have how much totally it costs? Cycleway at T119 is just 58 million now, and how much in the Golden Mile for the similar projects, not the Golden Mile itself? How much is the cycle lane part of that Golden Mile? And again, you go back to Central City upgrades. How much is going into that project again? Not to the whole project, to the cycle lane. Exactly.
I think for the cycleways, Vita's just explained that and how it's allocated.
So basically, we don't have the specific of it, but we have general.
We do. It's budgeted, as Vita explained, there's a program budget that has been set, and then the name of the plan that she explained, which I've Panaki Ponaki, that outlines the projects within that has been agreed by the council. So she's working to a program budget as a whole, and how that pans out has been agreed through the Panaki Ponaki program.
Yeah. So basically now, as part of this long-term plan amendment, the only thing that we're doing is cutting the New Zealand Transport agencies to half, and the rest is going as it is.
So what we're doing is we're decreasing the program budget, and Vita is using that to prioritise what is in the program of work based on how this council has prioritised those projects.
And just to be clear, as I said before, we have neutralised the NLTP, but then we've also done additional savings. So we've cut an additional 23 million off the bike network plan in the next 10 years, so that's a saving. We've cut around 65 million out of the city streets, the budget that was returned from that, on top of the NLTP neutralisation. So we are proposing savings. We're not just taking it back to neutralisation.
So as part of...
No, sorry, Councillor, I'll put you back on the list. Yeah. Councillor Randall.
Yes, I just want to... You noted inside the Harbour Quays is actually... Me?
Sorry to disturb you, Councillor.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
No, I wasn't. Yeah, sorry.
So, in terms of Harbour Quays, you said there's a cycleway element to the Harbour Quays project. I mean, what is it, and how much does it cost? I guess that's two questions.
We've split the Harbour Quays. We've got the Harbour Quays project, which is purely bus priority. That's 10 million. And then on top of that, there's the cross-city bike connection. These were the prioritisations that you made through the LTP. And for that, we've allocated 7.5 million. And that creates that east-west and north-south connection through Te Aro.
Okay, thank you.
There was just one.
Well, I was trying to use your counting method. I counted that as two.
Councillor Pannett.
Sean, you'll be delighted to know I'm not so worried about the Begonia House as a heritage structure. What I'm more concerned about is that we're removing just the fact that we're going to have indoor plants. So if there was an economic case that it would be cheaper to build another one on its place, under the rules, would we be able to do that?
There is a pathway to building a new Begonia house, should you choose to do that. However, you are going to have to negotiate quite a torturous consent process to do that. So what you would be effectively doing is trying to build a reproduction of the house.
Like to make it smaller?
No, what you would be trying to do is to keep the values that have created the heritage area within the Botanic Gardens intact within that reconstruction. So you could, say, build a new double glazed house that was more energy efficient, but it would need to essentially match the previous house.
So, and when the recommendations came through to demolish it, did you give advice on whether it was, how difficult that would be to do so?
I have given advice to the relevant officers subsequent to the proposal, yes.
And your advice is that that would be troublesome? Or
Yes,
challenging, maybe, sorry.
Yes, there would be a high transaction cost and a degree of uncertainty that would need to be built into your decision making. You would also need to be able to satisfy under the Resource Management Act that you have considered all the reasonable options.
Okay, thank you. Can I go back on the list?
Councillor Calvert, and because we will even let you have more than 3. This is injury time for you, Councillor.
Disability issues. I like the spot. I've got one question. One question around the city streets, and following on from a couple of questions, could we give a visual representation of what's planned, even sort of maybe a bit of colour coding? I think that would really be helpful about what's planned and when, because it's quite hard to read in the table. And then my second question is, the LTP is about savings, but just wondering about other revenue sources. And one of the things is around encroachments and whether we can look at ways of more easily selling land. And
thank you. And Liam Veda, did you have an answer for number 1 before I jump into number 2?
Number 1, we're just talking about that, Councillor, so yes, we'll be able to provide that project-based map.
Yeah. Number 2, yes, I am always looking at. Sorry, I have to put my back to you to talk into the microphone. I feel awful, actually. We're always looking at ways that we can bring in other revenue sources. There was some detailed work done quite some time ago on this, and it's actually part of a conversation that I've been having more recently with some externals around what are some of the options. It is incredibly difficult to put the right mechanisms in place, but I understand that there may be some openness to changing legislation to help that. So certainly keeping an eye on that and having those active conversations. But on the basis of this LTP amendment, that's not something that we can realise at this point in time, because it's not based on the best available information, because we don't yet have those legislative changes and we haven't made that assessment yet, but certainly something we'll continue to work through.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Young.
I do hope we have better mics when we move office. So just going back to the Begonia House, and it's really for Sean, because it's good to see him earning his keep. So just knowing that the Begonia House, if we decide to demolish it, it's a bumpy road ahead. And I think it has been indicated to us already that we're likely to face legal action. So what would the legal action be? And I mean, roughly what kind of sum of money does legal action like that require if we have to defend it?
I can't give you an estimation of cost. I'm not a lawyer for what the legal action would cost, but the grounds for legal action would be that the council has not fulfilled its Section 6 requirements under the Resource Management Act, which designate heritage to be a matter of national importance. As I reiterated, there is a pathway to building a like-for-like replacement. And you could make the argument that you have held the heritage aspects intact largely through keeping the form, function, feel, character of that particular part of the Botanic Gardens. But say you were to commission Calatrava to build you an amazing new modernist glasshouse, you would have a great deal of difficulty making that argument, and at that point you would likely face legal action, and that would be either through a judicial review of the decision-making process that you have used to come to that conclusion, or a substantive appeal to the Environment Court on the grounds that you haven't fulfilled your Section 6 requirements under the RMA.
Thank you. The second question, is it possible to get visitor numbers, say, over the past 10 years, knowing that the past 2 years have been a bit fraught due to removal of car parking, but because we do have all those tourist buses going there, so I mean it is regarded as one of our tourist attractions.
I would have to defer to Mr Andrews.
We don't have people counters up there, Councillor. Councillor, over here, Councillor.
Yeah, he's over there.
We don't have people counters, so we would have some anecdotal evidence, but we wouldn't have an exact number.
But do we have figures on the number of, because we put in those extra bus stops, to take away parking for private citizens who pay the rates. Do we have any idea of what numbers those buses, I mean, like if a bus takes 40 people and we have 40 buses a week, that's, a lot of people.
For you, Madam Chair, the indicative business case estimates about 240,000 visitors a year to the Begonia House.
Thank you. You see, there is an answer.
But it's an estimate.
Well, it's better than nothing.
Okay. Do you have another question? No. Okay. Councillor O'Neill.
Kia ora. From the attachment of the full capital program, I'm curious to understand what the Evans Bay Marina renewals budget line is.
Paul will be able to answer that. I think he's coming.
The Evans Bay renewals is piling renewals at the marina and the marine structures that the boats moor to. There's also a number of sheds there, so that will be covered in the renewals as well. I know we have some asbestos to remove from those sheds at some point.
Thank you. Are the upgrades, and I see below it Clyde Key Marina has a line for renewals, but it's significantly less money. I was just wondering how much of that renewals program is either legislatively required or has it been deferred? What's the story behind why the number is so big?
Clyde Key Boat Harbour, the assets that Council's responsible for there is the breakwater and the boat sheds and the apron. It's a different method of mooring boats. They have mooring blocks and the boat owners own those moorings. Evans Bay is an asset that came from the Harbour Board. It's requiring regular renewal of those assets because of the age and condition of them.
And just final question. In the opinion of looking at the asset renewals, is there any part of the renewals budget that would be subjectively considered a nice to have compared to something that might be absolutely must do, like asbestos removal?
Is that in the renewals budget as a whole? Yeah. Yeah, so just to take a step back for the renewals budget, obviously asset management plans pull together what is required for investment at a sort of a network level for our infrastructure. What we've done is we've made an assertion within that we will decrease the amount of that budget by 75%. Down to 75%. Yeah, sorry, not from. Sorry, down by 75% to 75%. In doing that, we're making some assumptions that we'd definitely be progressing things that relate to health and safety that need to be done through legal requirements, those kind of things. Where that 25% savings come from is certainly around actually synergies of grouping works together where it makes sense to do so we do it in a more efficient way. It comes down to the way that we procure services, so we're getting sort of better value for money from our contracts rather than pricing it on an asset by asset basis. But within the asset management plans itself, we certainly look at what must be done first, and it works. It gets worked through and prioritised on that basis.
Deputy Mayor Foon.
Just wanted to understand about the deferral of the parking plan into year 2. It really won't make much difference, will it? Because by the time we get through this, we're going to be in year 2 of the long-term plan.
Correct.
Thank you.
Councillor McNulty.
Hopefully the last two from me. Sorry, some feedback from last night with questions. It's just helpful to move the mic, then turn on the button, because if your people are listening online, they hear all the dragging and screeching. So I just wanted to share that was top of mind. Question for Dem Services, just to absolutely clarify, if this paper's moved as an amended substantive by the Mayor and it doesn't include some of the recommendations that officers have put up, then a majority is needed to pass an amendment to put those recommendations back in?
Yes, I was actually going to go into this at the end of the meeting. So the Mayor will be moving an amended substantive. Anything that's from the officer's advice, which is different or not in the Mayor's substantive, or anything additional to that, would need to be by amendment.
Cool. No, thank you. And last one, with Begonia House, I'm just wondering, given our learnings around the Town Hall project, we've gone from 8 to 25 million, we haven't even put a spade in the ground yet. Are there any parallels or things that we could potentially draw between the two projects, or lessons that are underpinning whether we should proceed further in this work?
I think just to reflect back on the different numbers, so in the business case that has been done, there are multiple options, right? So there was an option originally which was around about 8.5, but the issue with that option is it doesn't really provide a long-term solution, and secondly, it didn't take into account some of the further damage and deterioration of the building that happened through the winter period this year and since then. So that's why we're in essence saying that's not really a workable option any longer. It would kind of be a waste of money to spend that because we wouldn't really have the facility fully back in service and sustainable for the longer term. So that's where those earlier numbers came from.
Councillor Abdurrahman.
When I look at through these things, Andrea, some of them I just say, okay, maybe there are things that might be included in this and to exclude some others. And I wonder if some of those suggestions come from the team that is in that space. Example, if Paul contributed towards and his team contributed to what we can include, exclude, or how do you make those kind of decisions?
Yeah, so working through the process, what we did is we looked at all of the capital program and the long-term plan as it exists currently, and we worked through that on a line-by-line basis. So, and you may or may not recall from the LTP process and forming that, there was a lot of work to put into making sure the capital expenditure program was lean in the original LTP, and every part of the council went through that process and looked at all their capital expenditure budgets. So every single capital expenditure budget has been considered. A lot of people have highlighted, we've highlighted the pros and cons of, these certainly, many of these cuts do come with risks, but again, that's to help inform your decision making.
So they had an input, each department they had an input into...
That's been asked and answered.
Yes, absolutely. And that has been led by the chiefs primarily. So all the chief officers led that process and would have worked with their staff. I personally didn't speak to every single person that owns a budget, but that was owned by the chiefs right throughout the organisation.
So example, if I want to make sure the Social and Cultural Economic Committee, just as an example, or the Social and Recreation Department or whatever you call it, is not unfairly getting its own kind of share in this space, how do you address that?
Well, again, we have not looked at this and looked at fairness and equity across all of the areas. We have simply provided you with a list of capital expenditure projects, and we have provided recommendations to you. That's not our role. We've just provided you with the list. It's up to you as elected members to decide on where you want to make those cuts.
Based on the principles.
Well, our advice is based on the principles, but again, that's your choice is your choice.
Councillor Pannett.
sorry, Begonia House again. So given Sean's advice, and as I understood it, you got that advice subsequent to the business case, is it still your view that it should be demolished, given it's going to be challenging and there may well be legal action?
So, Councillor, it's not my view that it should be demolished. It's just, as Andrea just said, it's just an option, right?
Right, so there's some, we could say, go and patch up, do some more patching up and we'll phase out the project. That would be another option, is that?
So the options were in the business case. One of them is a much lower cost patching out type approach. But the reason that we haven't brought that paper to council yet and that business case to council is because we're going back to rework those options because we don't think that option is genuinely feasible because of the other damage that's been sustained by Begonia House over the winter, etc.
Okay. And the bond store, maybe that's still for you, is it? Or is it someone else?
Depends on your question.
Oh, it was just, in a way, it's a process question, maybe the Mayor will do it, but given the feedback from Experience Wellington, another deferral probably won't meet their needs. So are we able to at least say that we'll start doing some investigatory work to look at an alternative site?
Eastern,
Who's the...
Eastern or Anna?
Kia ora, Councillor. We're in discussions now with Experience Wellington. So we had some discussions on this on Tuesday of this week, and they'll be ongoing.
I guess I'm just want to give them some reassurance that we are finding a proactive way forward.
That's correct, yeah.
So will there be an amendment? Because if we just vote against that money going through, then there has to be some sort of communication about what we are going to do instead.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll defer that to you, Anna.
Yeah, so obviously the business case for the bond store we don't even have yet. That's coming back next year. So the budget that's in there now, the 20 million, is only a kind of holding number anyway. It's likely to be significantly more than that. So the two options that we're looking at, again, as a feed into those business cases, are one, strengthening the bond store. Option two, looking at an expanded footprint or the additional potential for the building in Tanako as an alternative site. Now, Experience Wellington, as part of their Tanako consultation, actually said that their preference is for that kind of more purpose-built facility within the Tanako Square footprint, but again, it's just too early. We haven't costed that out at all. So this one's a hard one because we don't actually have enough information yet and have done those business cases to be able to make that call. But what I would say is that 20 million wouldn't be enough anyway for the strengthening of the bond store.
So that's helpful. But we could put an amendment in though, just to say we are doing work.
I think you could take that conversation offline. Councillor Free.
It's probably not the time to ask it, but how safe is it for people to be in this Begonia House even now? No, we're hearing about the damage and the...
So I might defer to Paul or Yeston. Have we actually got a DSO on the Begonia House?
The building's not earthquake prone. The problem is the glazing system is basically past its end of its life. The most recent failure, we had to undertake quite a bit of remedial work. We have no option. And we have previously undertaken remedial work. So we continue to monitor it. We do close the glass house now in high wind periods. The staff have can make that decision at the time. But currently, the building is safe.
Thank you.
Councillor Randall.
Just wanted to ask a follow-up about the Mayor's amended substantive. Is that the contents of that is all based on officer recommended?
Can I just make a clarification? The officers aren't making recommendations. We're putting up options. I just want to make that clear because there's been a few questions that are referred to council, officer recommendations. We're providing options to you to work, to look at your capital program. So I just wanted to make that point clear.
And the Mayor's office has been working with officers in the development of the amended substantive.
Okay, and so just to clarify with officers, so that means that where there is no option offered up by officers advice is that there should be no change to the proposed budget.
No, what we're saying is we have worked through the capital expenditure program using the principles provided, and if there's other aspects of the budget that you wanted to see decreased, that would be entirely up to you as elected members to make that decision.
Okay. One last.
Yep.
So with respect to the bins, the organics bins option, why haven't officers recommended, put up a recommendation around that?
Because Chris Matthews isn't here today, can we come back to you on that one, given his illness?
Okay.
Councillor McNulty?
Sorry, I did say we're done, but just James, what was the damage sustained to the Begonia House over winter? Can you just remind us, please?
Yeah, sure. It's primarily, Paul knows the details, but it's primarily to do with the panes of glass. So glass breaking. I think, was there some issue with some of the framing around the glass as well, Paul?
There's two main challenges with the current structure. A lot of the framing inside the building is timber, and that is rotting and failing. And the other challenge is how the glass is fixed to the aluminium frames, and that is failing. So what we've had is don't quote me on this, but we've had at least two reasonably significant failures where panes of glass have been dislodged and either fallen into the house. And one of those events, there was a reasonably significant area kind of collapsed. I think the most recent event, we had glass actually blow over the roof of the house and land on the other side.
I don't have anybody on my list. It appears miraculously that we have come to the end of questions. So we will close the session. I'd like to thank the team for... what about the process?
I just thought you said at the end, after our questions, you were going to talk about the process.
But I did answer it, which was to say that about the Mayor's substantive, if there is anything from either officer's advice or addition to officer's advice that you want to include in the amendment, that will need to be by a separate amendment. So that was what I was going to say. So I've just said it twice. All right. No, that was it. So we will close off the live stream and close the meeting. Thank you everyone for answering our questions. My understanding then after that there is